So I may have mentioned this, I may have not have mentioned this, but one of the schools where I had subbed several times, it was a pretty good school to sub at, actually, was Farragut High School on the south side. And Farragut, it became famous because Kevin Garnett and Ronnie Fields, the big time basketball star. Ronnie Fields was actually, I mean, I was predicting he was going to be a big guy in the NBA, but unfortunately he had that motorcycle accident. But Kevin Garnett went there, and this, though it's not, I would not say it's a predominantly black school. It's like more Hispanic. And Farragut it's got gang problems, like pretty much every school in Chicago. I mean, not every, but like a lot of them. And sometimes it's interesting, especially with some of the Hispanic gangs, because you got a lot of immigrants coming over that end up getting pressed. And how they deal with this is very interesting to see how it goes. Now, this particular student that I'm going to talk about in this video, I did not know personally. I just worked at his school, but this story eventually got picked up by the media because they eventually got down on him, and he actually resisted it. He did not cave to the pressure. But this just goes to show the price that he paid for it. So this is a flashback to the attack that eventually happened to him. Okay, and this is being reported by the Chicago Tribune. They said with his throat slashed and his shirt covered in blood, he was a 15-year-old boy. He was crouched in a garbage can where he had been tossed and left for dead. Occasionally he could hear sounds, cars passing, people walking by, but he wouldn't look out or call for help for fear that his attackers would return. For 90 minutes, he huddled in the garbage can and held a balled-up sweater to his neck to try to stop the bleeding. He said, "I was thinking about what was going to happen to me, how I was going to get out, and who was going to help me." His attackers, according to police, were members of the Latin Kings, the gang that had ruled his little village neighborhood. And that's an area where there's like a lot of different sets of Latin Kings. I don't know, to be honest with you, if all of them are getting along, but the main war over there is Latin Kings and 2-6. But again, neutrons, like people that are not involved in anything, get pressed all the time, man. And it's really bogus, especially young Latino guys. So anyways, the Latin Kings, they had apparently attacked him. And he lived in their territory. And that's, I mean, something in a little village you can't really avoid because the 2-6 are the Kings. They got pretty much that entire neighborhood, like a chessboard. So they had grabbed him. And this kid was apparently a quiet kid. He weighed barely 100 pounds and was only about 5 feet tall. And they had grabbed him outside of his family's front door on a cold evening in March. They told him that this was his initiation and they were going to make him a king. So he said no, according to police. He told them no, he's not going to be a king. And in the hours that followed, the 3 gang members, they said, allegedly beat him, stabbed him in the neck, and dumped him into the garbage can. So at this point, it was past midnight, and snow was falling over the city. Now, this kid was an immigrant, a lot like the migrants that are coming up now, except this kid was from Mexico. So there was the sound of a car stopping that he heard, and a nearby garage door. The boy got the courage to lift the lid of the garbage can and look out, and in the alley there was a guy. The boy started, like talking to the guy. He said, "Help me." So the man looked terrified. He got in his car, pulled into the garage, and closed the door behind him. The boy thought that he was going to die alone there because the guy had just closed the door on him after he had asked him for help. But then he heard sirens. So the guy had probably called 911, and that almost certainly did happen. And the boy said, "I was scared. I was thinking, I have to be a man. I have to fight. I have to survive." So when he had just arrived from Mexico 7 months earlier than that, okay, and his mother had warned him when he came from Mexico, she said, "Stay away from the boys who spray paint walls and doorways with 5-point crowns." She said, "You have to stay safe." But that's the problem. Okay, how do you stay safe when they're going to come after you? So he was in 10th grade, and I'm not going to say his real name. I'm going to just call him Bob. His name wasn't Bob. Okay, I've never met a Mexican kid whose name is Bob, actually. That's for his safety, and he didn't know, like, how he was going to stay safe in this hood that was run by the Kings. So, in little villages, there's a lot of, like, family-owned restaurants and, taquerias, bodegas. But the Kings are like all over the place, okay? And they're in the hallways at school, they're on the corners as he was walking home, and he couldn't really avoid running into the Kings. So he was like I said, fresh from Mexico. And to be honest with you, I don't know if the Kings actually have any presence in Mexico. I mean, Mexicans know about them, but I think that's just an American gang. So the teachers at Farragut started to get worried about Bob, that he was headed on down a dangerous path because they had caught him with a black and gold bandana. And I told you, A lot of the Latino gangs in Chicago still do the color banging stuff, and you can get killed like for having the wrong colors. So, they were worried about this when they found his bandana, and on his Facebook page, he had posted a picture of a lion. A lion is a symbol of the kings, okay? Now, I'll tell you guys, a lot of kids who like live in a certain area where, all their friends are, members of a particular gang, or like that gang runs their neighborhood, they'll kind of rep it even though they're not actually involved. And this is a really bad thing to do. I mean, kids do it. I don't, you'd have to ask them why exactly they're doing it, but a lot of times they will just act like they're part of that gang when they're really not. Like, even if they're from the neighborhood. So he claims that he was actually not a king, and he was just repping the gang. Okay, and this is one thing that the media a lot of times can incorrectly portray. Let's have a lot of people in the comment section talking about, like, well, he was part of that life, so he got what he deserved. Listen, as somebody who has worked in the schools directly with these kids and known them personally, I'm telling you, I'm not just saying this to like clear their name or get them off the hook. What I'm saying is true. A lot of the kids that rep that stuff really are not part of it. They're not. I would say actually probably at least 50% of them that do that. But anyways, police and prosecutors say that they believe that he was actually not part of the gang. And the attack on Bob, it got a lot of attention in the community because the circumstances and the severity were highly unusual. So people who work with gang members in Little Village never heard of a person being so violently attacked because he refused to join the Kings. Now at Sullivan, we had a white kid who was jumped by I think he was jumped by the Eagles when he first came to Sullivan. This is on the north side. The Eagles is a mostly I think it's like Mexicans and Puerto Ricans. The Eagles weren't real deep in Sullivan. There was like a few of them, but he told me that they had dragged him into the bathroom in the halls of the school, jumped him, started whooping him, and asked him what he was going to, flip, and he flipped Eagle. So from that point on, he was Eagle. Then later he had tried to flip something else. He tried to flip GD, and he got pressed by like his former homies, and I saw this happen right in front of my eyes. Like, it wasn't just something I heard about, because they did it right in the school. So, anyways, flipping anything is a really bad idea. It's better to just normally just take the beating, because even if you're outnumbered, I've never heard of a guy being attacked this severely either, where they stabbed him in the neck. Uh, if you actually tell them yes that you're going to join, now you can't leave. You know what I'm saying? Like, now if you tell them, oh, I was just kidding, or no, I'm not really going to, now you're actually risking something, seriously dangerous happening to you. It's better to just tell them no from the get-go. Normally you're just going to get whooped, and that'll be it. But you're not going to, I mean, it's like you're going to get violations when you join the thing anyways. So, like, you might as well just take that beating. I'm saying this is like the best option in a bad circumstance. Obviously, the best circumstance is not even to be in that neighborhood in the first place, but a lot of kids don't have any control over that. So I'm saying, if worst comes to worst, just take the beating and tell them no. Because I've never heard of anybody being stabbed in the neck because they wouldn't join either. That typically happens if a guy tries to leave or flips something else. And if you do join, now you're going to be in a position where you're going to have to do that. So, anyways, people who work with the gang members in Little Village say they'd never heard of somebody being attacked that bad. So, according to Bob, he'd grown up in a village in Mexico, and he wanted to see his mom. He was only 3 years old, according to his family, when his father was hit by a truck and killed. So 2 years later, his mom left him and his 2 older brothers with her parents and traveled to Chicago to search for work. So Bob asked his mom, when are you coming home? Every time they would talk on the phone. And she kept on telling him soon, even though she knew that wasn't really true. So the village in Mexico where Bob came from only had about 100 homes in it. So I don't know how many people. The population couldn't have been more than like 400 or 500. And it was like very safe. Okay, I mean, you're talking a small town, a small village in Mexico, like very safe. He and his family knew everybody in the village. There was like almost no danger, according to his family. So in 2010, about 7 years after their moms had left for Chicago, Bob's oldest brother left for Chicago. By then, Bob knew his mom was never coming back, and he told her, I wanted to come to Chicago too. So Bob's mom had remarried and was living in a little village apartment when she hung a copy of the 10 Commandments in the kitchen. Outside of her third floor window, they said she could see the gang members on the street corner. She worried that it was a dangerous place to bring a teenager. She said, I have seen how they have killed other boys. But she missed her son, Bob. And by the way, guys, I'm just reminding you, his name isn't Bob. In the summer of 2013, she promised $5,000 to a coyote or a coyote. And these are guys who are basically like, they smuggle illegal immigrants across the border, who agreed to bring Bob across the border. Okay. So in Mexico, Bob had just turned 15 when he said goodbye to his grandparents, knowing that he would likely never see them again. So he was coming to the U.S. He traveled north by car and bus with a family friend, and at the border, he went on alone. He met up with the coyote. He crossed the Rio Grande in a raft, and he walked through the desert with 20 people. So the journey to Chicago took 11 days. So it was August when he was dropped off at a restaurant on the south side. His mom pulled up in her truck, and he went over to her, walking as fast as he could. They had not seen each other for about 10 years. Bob was now a teenager. The last time that, he had seen his mom, he was just a little kid. But, they embraced each other. So the last time he had seen her, she was only 27, and now she was 37. So Bob, much like the migrants, when he came to Chicago, was just in shock at everything that he was seeing. He was seeing these skyscrapers downtown. He was, seeing everything in the big city, because this wasn't just like coming to the U.S. It was, in one of the major cities of the U.S., a lot different from a small village in Mexico. And he was trying to get used to living on a third floor apartment where the windows were looking out on the treetops. Winter came and snow came, and he saw snow for the first time, and he was just, like they said, mesmerized by this. So he didn't speak any English at this time, and they did not allow him to go anywhere by himself except the corner store. His family had warned him about the gang. They said, there's no way you will leave a gang alive, according to his brother. And they said if a Latin king ever approached, they told Bob to walk away. But Bob found out that it wasn't so simple, and it's not. It's not that simple. There were Latin kings in two of his classes and in the lunchroom at school. And some of these kids he considered friends. So school officials were starting to worry that Bob was being lured into the gang. They saw him over on the corner of 24th and Christiana, which is a corner that belongs to the Kings, and students were forbidden to go over there. Okay, so Bob was on the opposite corner and waiting for a friend. And in February, a teacher spotted a bandana in Bob's school bag with a drawing on a notebook. The bandana was yellow and black. That's according to the media. The colors of the Kings is actually gold and black, and yellow and black is actually one of their ops, which is the SDs. So I don't know. It was probably a golden. It may have been a golden black bandana, but the drawing was a 5-point crown. And he says that a classmate had asked him to hide the items. So the classmate, according to him, was his friend. And he didn't want to say no. So his mom said, when I got that call from the school, I started to worry. She started reading to him from the Bible, from the book of Proverbs, and the verse, keep company with the wise and you will become wise. If you make friends with stupid people, you will be ruined. So the school had asked a guy named Benjamin, who's a former gang member who now mentors youth for a local nonprofit, to speak with Bob. They sat down for about 45 minutes. Afterwards, Benjamin had guessed that the boy was just trying to make friends. He said, I figured he was starting to hang around with kids in the gang, was trying to figure out if he wanted to get more involved. He said, I would say he was on the fence. This is according to Benjamin, who was 38 years old. He said, we have kids in their neighborhood who are like that. They will hang around with gang members and might wear the colors and might wear their hat to one side or the other, but they're not fully in and have not made a commitment. And he's right. There's a lot of kids like that. So Benjamin wasn't overly worried about Bob. He said, I didn't get the sense that he was going to plug in with anyone. Bob didn't mention to Benjamin or his mother, though, that on recent days he had been walking home to school with a kid who's, again, his other name I'm not going to say. I'll just change his name to Ed. Okay, so Ed was a 16-year-old. So Ed had told Bob that the boys in the gang were the toughest kids in the neighborhood. So they would be talking together, and Ed had been asking Bob to become a Latin king. Okay, so it was cold and it was dark when Bob stepped out of his front door at around 8:30 p.m. on March 15th to buy soda and chips at the corner store. So according to a police report, this is what happened. Ed was outside, okay, With Ed was a stocky guy in his late 20s who had a tattoo of a crown on his arm. Bob had never seen this guy before. Okay, they told Bob to come with them. Now remember, Ed is the guy who he's the 16-year-old that Bob had been walking home with. Okay, Bob refused. He wouldn't come with them. So Ed, okay, his supposed homie that he'd been walking home with, and the other guy threatened to beat him. Okay, now this was the beginning of 6 hours during which these gang members walked Bob to a laundromat, where a third guy who was later identified by prosecutors. I'm not going to say I'm not going to say anybody's government name here. I'll just say his name was Steve. Okay, Steve was a 20-year-old. He joined them. They blindfolded Bob and they walked into a house. That's where Ed removed Bob's blindfold and announced that this was his initiation into the gang. This is, I mean, they were doing a lot. Okay, like I've seen guys, like I said, pressed, to join these gangs and stuff. I've met kids who've been pressed into these gangs, and heard plenty of stories about kids being jumped in the hallways of schools and stuff like that. But this was a bit much. I mean, they were doing a lot. Okay, to walk into this house and blindfold them and all this stuff, like this is the most I've ever heard of guys doing to get a 15-year-old. You know what I'm saying? Like to get somebody like this into the game. Like if there's a guy who's a high value like plug or something like that, or somebody who knows how to do something, crack cards, do something like that. That might be a different story. They might, do some extra stuff to try to get him to join. But somebody like this, who's, just fresh from Mexico, 15 years old, 100 pounds, 5 feet tall, like I've never heard of any gang doing this much to get somebody like this, man. But anyways, Ed explained that Bob would start in gang security and he'd be given a gun and a street corner to protect. He said he would be a man. He would swear allegiance to the Latin kings, and they would be his family. But Bob said no. So his assailants became angry, and Ed assured Bob that the gang was cool, and to be cool, Bob needed to join. Again, Bob said no. That's when the man with the tattoo allegedly kicked Bob in the side of the head. The gang members took Bob's wallet, his iPhone, and his keys, but they weren't really like doing too much more than that at that particular point. They said that they were going to let him go. So they blindfolded him, they walked him out to a nearby alley and then removed the blindfold. That's when Ed yelled, quote, "You're a Latin king now," according to the report. So Ed and one of the other guys punched Bob and knocked him down. Then the man with the tattoo attacked Bob with a knife. And see, this is just, I've never heard of something like this happening for somebody like this, I've never heard of this happening before, man. To be honest with you, like they'll stomp him out, they'll beat him, but I mean, to attack him with a knife over this, I mean, he didn't do anything to any of their homies or try to holler at one of their girlfriends. Or, like, he didn't do anything. He just doesn't want to be a king. And they're like doing all this extra stuff. But anyways, so Bob tried to defend himself, but the more he struggled, the more violent the man became. The man allegedly stabbed Bob 4 times in the neck. Then Bob, desperate to save himself, held his breath, let his body go limp, and pretended that he was dead. So at that point, Ed, the 16-year-old that Bob had been walking home from school with, said, quote, "This mother effer's done." So that morning, Bob's mother rushed to the hospital, arriving at around 2:30 a.m. Outside an operating room, she found her son, his neck in a bandage, and his face was swollen and bruised. The knife had missed the arteries in his neck. Thank goodness, man. But left him unable to turn his head, chew his food, drink from a cup, or even sit up on his own. So after that, 2 people were arrested. One was Ed, okay, Bob's classmate, and he's only charged as a juvenile. And the other was a Latin king who goes by the street name Young Rocket. So both of those people now face charges including attempted murder, kidnapping, robbery, and battery. And I believe the Young Rocket guy is also charged with gang intimidation. I didn't even know that was a charge, but the man with the tattoo is still out there. So 3 days after the attack, Bob was discharged from the hospital with 32 stitches in his neck. Over the following weeks, he slowly recovered his ability to move and eat. Doctors said that he would be fine, but his family was worried about his safety. They did not send him back to school. He said the people who did this to him, they tried to kill him, and thank God they didn't. But if they see him on the street, they will finish him, according to his mom. She wants to move to the suburbs where she believes that it's safer, but she makes only $9 an hour working as a painter. And she says that she took a month off from work to care for Bob, and she doesn't have the $1,800 that she estimates that it will cost for a deposit and the first month's rent for a new place. And they haven't even finished paying for the coyote who brought Bob to Chicago. So when the weather started to get warmer, Bob was spending all of his time indoors, and the family, they didn't want his location disclosed. And the mom goes to work every day trying to scrape together money to move. And after work, she prepares dinner. So on most evenings, she says that she can look out the window and see on the corner about a dozen Latin kings. So, okay, this kid's life, like, is in serious danger, man. Because now, I mean, there's been arrests that have, resulted from this case. So now he's got beefs that the gang might have with him because if people have been arrested as a result of what happened to him, even though it's their fault they did it to him, that's still like, okay, he's he's just something that there's just something they can hold against him. You know what I'm saying? So a little bit, like I said, it's a little bit extra from what I usually see as far as kids getting pressed to join these gangs. But this is a lesson to all the parents. You bring your kid over here, you bring him to a gang neighborhood. This is what's going to happen to him. You know what I'm saying? If you got a young black or Latino son, like this is what's going to happen. Even like I said, I've seen this happen to white kids. Getting pressed into Latino gangs. I've never really seen a black gang press a white kid and stuff like this, but um, yeah, I mean it's just part of living in that neighborhood. So they move to those neighborhoods. I told you guys a lot of this stuff, man, is just a lot of these. As far as like the choices of people moving to certain spots is just a lack of information about what's out there. If I were her, okay, and I don't know this lady personally, I would look into just getting an Airbnb someplace else. Okay, I found places like super cheap. You share it with somebody else. You and another lady like split it. Going on something like that. Okay, it's gonna be cramped, but so what? You have to sacrifice space for safety. A lot of times that choice has to be made. Okay, you can get a place in an area that's not like a gang infested like war zone, like little village, if you're willing to be in a cramped space. I told you guys when I was staying in Forest Park. Okay, Forest Park is not that far from a bunch of gang territories. It's actually like right next to Austin. Okay, but it's like way safer. It's literally walking distance from like the hot zone. You know what I'm saying? Like, I mean, Vice Lords, Four Corner Hustles, like they're just to the east of that, like a few blocks, literally walking distance. But it's way safer. Now I was paying $700 a month, which is kind of a lot, but I mean, there were places cheaper than that. And like I said, I was living in a place basically the size of like a storage closet. Okay, I couldn't even like walk around in that place. I mean, it fit the bed, the desk, the fridge. That was about it. Okay, but so what? You're safe. I mean, no one's ever completely safe, but I mean, you know what I mean. Like, you don't have to worry about stuff like Latin Kings pressing your kid into joining in a neighborhood like that. And plus, you get into a certain zone and you're not going to the public school that's in that other zone where all the gang members go. We had kids at the schools going to all different, getting bused to all different parts of the city just, to avoid gang conflicts. Like the Kings, none of the Kings from Clark Street went to Sullivan, even though that's the closest high school. None of them. Like, Sullivan was a GD school. The GDs had Sullivan, like, totally. I mean, there were Stones and stuff in Sullivan, but like by and large, it was GDs. That's PBG's school, and the Lokes. I mean, they can go there too, but back then when I was there, that war wasn't going on. But so I mean, the GDs just had a period. There were zero, and I mean, guys, I'm talking zero Latin Kings in that school. Even though there was a huge Latin King area, just like on Clark Street, just a couple blocks to the west. They're all going to other high schools. Like Amundsen had a lot of Latin Kings. Sen, I think, had Latin Kings. Okay, so they got to go a little bit farther distance, but okay, so what? It's they're not going to be in there beefing with the GDs, So the parents, it's like disconcerting to me as a sub who's been all over the city and seen all these different like high schools and all the gang territories. All these different high schools are in to see parents putting their kids unknowingly in a dangerous situation unnecessarily when they don't have to be in that dangerous situation because they just don't know about their other options. You know what I'm saying? And this is especially true for immigrant parents. Some of the American parents too, but I would say the immigrant parents more. They just don't know. So now, I mean, Bob, he's stuck not going to school, sitting at the crib, not doing nothing, basically, on house arrest by the gangs. Like that's not a situation that any 15-year-old should. Like, I mean, it would have been better for him to stay in Mexico. So I think what they need to do is they need to talk to the people at the school, okay, who have been here for a minute and who know like the gang territories around there, and they need to figure out a way to get Bob into another school for the time being, and then she needs to figure out a way, like to find a place that's it's gonna be small. It's gonna be smaller than the place that she's currently in, because the suburbs has gangs too. I mean, there's Latin kings in the suburbs too. Like not every suburb is safe. I mean, they could move to Maywood or something, and just be right out of the frying pan into the fire. So I mean, or Cicero, Bellwood. I mean, there's gangs all over these neighborhoods. So they got to move. I would move like to the north side, okay, because the gangs up there is a little different. Nobody's really gonna know who he is up there. But, up there, there's going to be some cheap stuff. Yeah, I mean, up north, it's a little different. It's a little different. You kind of have to go looking for that a little bit more. It's not really going to come to your doorstep like it does out south, quite as much. That used to be going on in East Rogers back in the 90s and stuff. But today, I don't know how much that really goes on. Maybe if you're hanging out with them every day on purpose, but I mean, you got to avoid those kids, man. See, he started off walking home. That was his big mistake. He started off walking home with that kid Ed from school. That was his choice. He shouldn't have done that. You got to avoid him. You know what I'm saying? If you got to be a loner and don't have any friends, do it. Like you start making friends with the gangbangers, like you're putting yourself into the the belly of the beast, so to speak. Okay, well now anything that happens beyond that point, like you took the risk. So completely avoid the gangbangers, period. And Farragut is a school where you don't have to be friends with gangbangers. Like there's plenty of kids at Farragut that aren't doing that. So that I mean, it's too late now though, because now that guys have gotten locked up behind this, if the Kings see him, I mean, turn around and run. But I mean, sooner or later that's going to happen if he's living there, right in their neighborhood. So I mean, they got to get him out of there ASAP. It would be better to live in a tent like these migrants are doing somewhere else. Go to the airport, live with the migrants. You know what I'm saying? Like the migrants all speak Spanish anyways. It would be better to be there right now than to be right in the heart of the Latin Kings neighborhood where they can find you like just a matter of time, just bump into you any second. So anyways, that's my advice to her, man. You guys let me know what you think in the comment section. Any advice you guys have or any area you guys suggest that she can move to. It's your boy Chicago News. I'm out.